Well, I had been exposed originally to the Enneagram in my work with Claudio Naranjo, which began in 1971. And I was in the first group that he taught the Enneagram in the US. And Hamid and his wife Marie were also part of that group. After the group broke up, we kind of went our separate ways, and I went away to meditate in England for a couple of years. And Hamid began having realization that was quite transformative for him. And he began developing the diamond approach. When I came back, he had begun to teach in California as well. And other friends of mine kept telling me how amazing the work was that Hamid was doing. It seemed to me that he was developing a spiritual technology that was absolutely revolutionary. I came back from meditating for 2 years, deeply stuck in the central deficiency of my personality. And Karen, who was a very close friend of mine, she had been a roommate of mine in art school. Karen did a little piece of inquiry with me one day when I was really suffering. And she took me through the whole in like 10 minutes. And I was like totally amazed. And so it totally deepened my understanding of the Enneagram, and also really provided a method for working with it, because in my experience, what had happened in Claudio's group is that Claudio was great at helping us understand our personality structure and our Enneatype, but it did take us to our core sense of deficiency. And he didn't have the technology to take us through it. And Hamid was doing that, had developed that technology. So it really provided a way of working with the Enneagram that could be transformative for people and not just helping them know more about their structure, but actually how to get through it.
When I got involved in the diamond approach, I was already, in the beginning stages of teaching the Enneagram. But more importantly, I had been in the Gurdjieff work for quite some time, since the 1970s. And so I was very practiced in the basic ideas of presence, the centers, and various things. But I felt in Gurdjieff language that I'd come to what we call an interval or a shock point, where I just kept practicing and didn't seem like my work was developing and was stuck. And it was around that time that I encountered Hamid's first book, Essence, and was very impacted by it. I was fascinated by the methodology. I was fascinated by inquiry, the practice of inquiry, and I was amazed at how quickly the whole diamond approach could open up a person to realizations of their essential nature. So this impacted both my approach to the Enneagram very much, but it also then became my path and been part of the school ever since.
What we'll be doing in the course is explicating how each of the types mirrors and emulates a particular quality of presence, and how that shows up in the characteristics of each of the Enneatypes. We'll also be talking about and exploring more particularly how to get in touch with that quality of presence.
We're going to be discussing the 9 types and fixations. But Sandra and I both have the view that each one of these points is an element that's in all of us. And each one of the points has a capacity, a potential for opening up different dimensions of our experience. So while we will be talking about, the 9 types and what they look like and so forth, the more central thrust of what we're doing is, one, seeing how all of the 9 points are living in us. We're also bringing a context to the Enneagram. The Enneagram was originally part of a whole particular orientation, view of reality, of the human condition, and we're going to be playing more with that context.
As Russ was saying, we're not confining it to what your Enneatype is. We have all of them within us. And so each one is a doorway to a particular quality of our nature. And we'll be employing the tools of the diamond approach, the tool of inquiry in particular, to help make that access more readily available to people.
Over the years, I've learned that people can't get too far having their noses rubbed in their fixation, in their psychological problems. They kind of know that they have them, nor does it exactly help to sort of, stroke people's narcissism about how deep and profound and amazing they are. Well, yeah, you are, but let's see what's here now. What's really wonderful about the way we're going to be working with this is we're learning to locate the sense of what we are beyond these structures in very specific ways, actually. And from that vantage point, looking at the structures that have been problematic for us, which produces something very different than the ego trying to fix the ego.
The point Russ is bringing up is really, really crucial about both how to work with the Enneagram and how to practice the diamond approach, which is that all of the elements of our personality structure mimic something real, something essential, something deeper. And if we can follow those elements of our structure, they will inevitably take us to what they're not exactly the fabrication of, but a distortion of. And we can look at the whole personality structure. We can look at the whole Enneatype, each Enneatype, as a distorted version, a version seen through veils, to use a less charged way of describing it, that when we remove the veils, we can get in touch with what that particular presentation of the personality is attempting to express.
I think that sometimes there are elements of the descriptions that we might encounter online or in a book or in a workshop that you'll go, yeah, that's true. But then again, it doesn't take us to the root of the problem. And what's interesting about what Oscar Chazo put forward, that each of the types was generated around what he called a passion. And I think of the passion as the core suffering. It's from the Greek passio, or Latin passio, excuse me, but which means suffering. And there's a way in which, as we learn to support ourselves with presence and have some realization of what we really are, we have the wherewithal, we have the internal resources to go back to these early primal difficulties and resolve them in ways that open up new possibilities for us as human beings. So for example, if I tell a person whose dominant pattern is 0.3, that they work a lot, that they're really into efficiency, that they work too much, that, I can tell them these things. Sometimes you get out of touch with your feelings because you're so focused on getting things done. And that person can say, yeah, but they know that about themselves in a certain sense. But if we go down into the kind of inner emptiness that that person feels when they're identified with that pattern. And if we also present to them a sense of who they really are that they resonate with, and there are very specific essential features that we could talk about from a number of angles, but just there are, in Diamond Heart language, some pearly manifestations, our personal essence, the part of us that is able to function from presence, from being, and that we experience as just a magnificent flow, right? Every three I know will feel that's heaven. Those moments that are like that, that's the absolute best. But when we sort of help people recognize that that's the truth of you, that wasn't just a weird experience, that wasn't a drug trip, that was you. Then from there, that person has the empowerment, if you will, and the compassion to go and into the process of healing the early difficulties that have generated a lot of their patterns. And each of the 9 points is like that.
We could look at, I'll take an example of one Enneatype, Enneatype 2, that I'm very familiar with. The idealized quality of true nature that this Enneatype really shapes itself around and attempts to emulate is the quality of being, the quality of presence that has to do with merging ecstatic love, merging with the divine, and the sense of bliss, the sense of contentment, the sense of indescribable oneness that's ecstatic, that happens when we realize this particular quality of our nature. And it's the quality that is expressed by many of the mystical traditions, and that many of the spiritual paths are oriented toward, particularly the bhakti paths. And the mimicry that I was referring to has to do with how Enneatype 2s are giving, they're generous, they're attempting to get there for other people, to fill their needs. And it's all about empathy and intuiting what's going on with another person, what they need, basically so that the two can get that merging, can get that connectedness, can feel personally deeply loved because of what they're doing. They're a neighbor of point 3 that Russ was just talking about. So the doingness in this case is a doingness that's predicated on essentially doing and giving to get. When we look at it from the perspective of the personality, it's a pattern, it's a game, it's a strategy. But what a 2 is trying to get really is that sense of deep closeness with the core of who they are. They attempt to do it through relationship, through other people. But that drive is never satisfied until the union happens within oneself. So that's one example of how the idealized quality is expressed in the personality type. The Enneagram, in my experience, has endless opportunities for us to learn about ourselves. And there are so many dimensions of it, so many levels of understanding of it, that my sense is that it really takes a lifetime to begin to understand its mystery. And we can never fully understand it because it describes what a human being is. And ultimately, what we are is a mystery because we partake of the mystery of true nature. However, we can make deep inroads into that mystery that brings us closer to what our hearts long for. My sense is that what Russ and I will be doing in this course, I don't even think it's a matter of attempting to do, but what we will do is create a field in which that deeper access through the vehicle of the Enneagram becomes possible for you. It's something that I think will be interesting. This course will give you new insights and new understandings about yourself. And most importantly, it'll bring you closer.
I think most of us can recognize that we're in a very pivotal time. And as long as I've been working with the Enneagram and the fourth way and inner work, there's been this conversation about, that humanity's headed for some kind of big transition. Well, I don't think you need to be particularly psychic to notice that we're in it now. We are in the time of transition. So one of the things I think that we get from the inner work, beyond some of the more obvious benefits, is we learn to be able to meet the situation that we find ourselves in. A kind of intelligence that shows us how we can respond to the world as it presents whatever it does, and to not respond from our historic woundings, patterns, defenses, but from a much more profound, sensitive, and compassionate intelligence, which is the root of our humanity. And, as we go into these strange and uncertain times, what could be more important than you and I finding ways to meet each other from there? And in the long run, I'm not in this to just go around describing, character structures to people. I'm in it for the sake of some of us human beings figuring out how to be ambassadors of that intelligence, to meet each other from that intelligence, and perhaps with some of us awakening that way together, seeing some things that need to happen. Help us find a way forward. I don't know personally if I'm going to live to see some of the big changes that I feel are ahead, but I know I'm very clear that I want to make sure that I have given every good thing I've learned into the lifeboats of the people who are going to make this big crossing. I want them to have the best that we have. And so wherever you are in your journey, wherever you are in your life, there's a way we can potentially contribute to that for something greater than ourselves.